want to welcome a good friend and an OG from the Philippines ecosystem, Dexter Ligot-Gordon, and we're going to talk about how to build an ecosystem as powerful as Silicon Valley. Please give him a warm round of applause joining us here in Cluj.
Thank you. What an amazing conference.
So Dexter, first of all, thank you so much again for making it. I know that the trip from Philippines is not like the shortest in the world to Cluj.
I think, aside from you, I had the longest flight.
Yes, I do think so, except some people that missed their connections might have had longer trips. But what I'd love you to tell the audience is a little bit of your story, your first startup more than 10 years ago in the Philippines, when there was no ecosystem, and a lot of that is very much resonating with what kind of we've seen in Cluj originally. So could you tell us a little bit about Calibre and how your first startup in the Philippines came about? How did it feel? And we'll take it from there.
Well, I like to say that I started my first company 10 years and 40 pounds ago. So it was a very interesting time. I actually grew up in San Francisco, and not just in San Francisco, but in this part of town called the South of Market. For those of you who've been, this is where Twitter has its office. Pinterest was around the corner from where my grandparents lived. And Google, it was just down the street. And it was a bit of an irony moving halfway across the world to the Philippines to jumpstart in tech. I am Filipino in spite all of appearances. And I think that at the time, there was an interesting turning point, which created opportunity. The Philippines economy just started to pick up. Its GDP was growing 7% per year, which is creating disruptions in the market. There were companies who needed to hire and hire fast, and people who wanted jobs, and it was just really efficient to connect the two. So there's this present problem, and my background at that point was workforce development. So I had a skill set, this massive problem, and most importantly, I connected with a friend of mine who was running a company who was facing that problem firsthand. His name's Paul, and we ended up co-founding our first company together. So we used AI to match people with jobs at scale for an emerging economy, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges that we had was that when we say that there was no ecosystem, the two venture capital firms in the Philippines were founded within months of ours. So there was no footprint. Typically, you would work with your investors to kind of recruit your team, build your first, identify your market, and to start to build your footprint. So what we had done, Paul's initiative, is we actually applied for Y Combinator. It was the first time, the first year they started to accept international applicants. And the way in which we positioned ourselves, we actually got in. So because it was the first batch for international, we were the first Philippines, first Southeast Asian batch to get in. And I think, as we're talking earlier, one of the reasons why it was really important for us to do that is because when you're the first, when there is no ecosystem around you, you actually have to bring in the ecosystem with you. We had to bring in the investors, we had to bring in the talent and the expertise and let it take root. So there was a lot of challenges that we had, and I'm sure you'll ask about this initially. But because the opportunity was so big, the problem was so big, we felt motivated to splice in and to start to solve this problem at scale.
Yeah, I think the key theme that we see about all entrepreneurs talking is basically never wait for the perfect moment, because it just does not exist, right? You need to create the opportunity and not wait for the opportunity to be perfect, because it will never be there, right? That's the common theme across all entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. And I think that, I'm the flavor of founder that's very problem-centric. I fall in love with the problem. I really try to look at the nuances and try to create value by solving problems for people. And this problem was massive, and I was very passionate about it. How do we connect people with jobs such that they can not just sustain themselves, but feel passionate about what they do? And I think that you're absolutely right. There's never the right moment, and there are never the right perfect circumstances. Even though we were building uphill, we had to recruit, we had to sell the Philippines and the Philippines market just as much as we had to sell our own business. Our business model was very clear, and the market demand was very apparent. But bringing in the investors to say, hey, this is a market that's fast growing, you should pay attention here, build a footprint here, was kind of our responsibility at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, Cluj has evolved in remarkable similar ways, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people here work for technology service providers, right? Like, and that is in many, many cases, right? Like, where an ecosystem, like, there's a demand for workforce, and that's where the first steps of the ecosystem evolving are.
And I think that the title of this session is a bit evasive, but I think we should adapt this concept of ecosystem from the Valley, but I don't think we should rebuild it.
Yes.
Right? And I was talking to Jen yesterday. There are assets, whether they're cultural, historic, or environmental assets that each ecosystem is privy to. And I think here, this region, like, their STEM education is phenomenal, right? It's a very rare circumstance. In Southeast Asia, where I was based, the STEM education was not as great, but we had really strong design talent, right? We had strong product management talent. So we built towards our ecosystem strengths. I think what's the most important part, if you're looking for, like, you're building in an emerging market, there's two things that I would suggest. Be very thoughtful about your first set of investors. Your first set of investors, look for those who can help you build the relationships that will help you build your company. Whether if it's recruiting, opening doors to other investors, doing potential business development for you. The second time I started a company, Swarm, which is how I met Philip, we were very selective about our first set of investors. We wanted folks who believed the same things that we would, who could fight for the company in the same way that we would fight for our vision, which is to connect independent freelancers with amazing opportunities. And most importantly, who had the motivation and network to make the connections that we needed. At the end of the day, we applied more scrutiny on who we selected as investors than we did our first team members. And that was the most important thing. Going back to my first company, my first set of investors, because there was nowhere to hire engineers at that point who were building on Angular. There were no product managers that you could hire right off of the market. We had to train all of those folks. And it was through our first set of investors, through the Omidyar network, where we were able to pull in folks from eBay and PayPal to be operating mentors for our first generation of engineers, designers, and product managers. That's the work that you'll have to do, is to bring resources from the outside, expertise from the outside, to help bring it home to roost and to start to build the local ecosystem. Many of the early staff from those days, we trained product managers, we trained designers and engineers. Like, within a matter of 3 years, they've now gone off to found their own companies. One of my product managers, she was actually our first, Joanne, she joined Canva, and she ended up leading the team that built their video product, and she currently leads that. She's group product manager at Canva right now. So this is not a crazy thing. It's feasible if you're thoughtful about how you build your relationships to bring not just the financial resources, but the expertise and the footprint home to roost. One of the things that we took advantage of in the Philippines is that, many of the folks, there's this concept of community and communal success, such that when founders and members of the community succeed, there's this responsibility that they have to want to pull people up behind them. And I think that's one of the things that helped us build an ecosystem a bit faster. After we got into Y Combinator, it took 7 years for another company to follow from the Philippines. Now there's 4 companies from the Philippines in the current batch. Right? Last year there's about $2 billion of early stage capital that poured into Series B companies and beyond. So the ecosystem is, I don't want to say is mature, but it's certainly starting to thrive.
Yes, and if you talk to anybody in the Philippines, Dexter is like right up there. They tell you like all like, hey, if you're like Dexter is doing something just like by the trust and the talent that you've built, that everybody wants to be part of that, right? Like I mean, you said like earlier, right? Like when we were chatting, like at some point in time, like 6 out of the top 10 engineers as ranked by coding were like working in your startup, and not only because you like hired them, because you built up their talent and invested in them.
Well, I want to acknowledge my CTO, Aaron, for Swarm. He's here. What I wanted to say about this is that this is how much we challenge traditional concepts. We actually don't care if you went to college or if you graduated in my current company, Swarm. The reason why is because these are traditional methods of evaluating talent that kind of aren't very accurate. Right? They don't tell you if they're a good engineer or not. So we get very practical in how we select our talent. We have them code something and explain why they coded it the way that they did, and we ask them to code it differently. What we're essentially doing is we're getting a sense of what people's capabilities are. Because once we select them, once we hire them, we invest a lot of energy in supporting and training them. So Aaron actually himself twice a week would peer program with one of our engineers who she hadn't even graduated college yet, right? And investing a CTO's time to co-build and train. Because this is what we mean by foundation building, is that when you're building from scratch, when you're not hiring expertise off the street, so to speak, you have to be very intentional in investing your time and your passion into the people that will help you go from 0 to 1.
Yes, and I mean, what I really can't stress enough, right, like is this mindset that like everything that has a gap in the market is an opportunity for you to plug it, right? Like I think this is like, I think many times when people like say like, oh, we don't have the people who have done this or so on, it's not stopping you, right? Like I think that's what's like, I think for me the key takeaway lesson for people here in the audience, right? Like you've done it, you've successfully done it with your company, and I'm very confident you'll do it successfully with the next one as well.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. When we started to train our own people, when word got out that we were bringing valley-level expertise and we're investing in training people, it's not that we were just hiring good enough. The best in the Philippines started to apply for our company. Why? Because they wanted to learn. They knew that we were investing. And I mentioned earlier there's $2 billion that got poured into early-stage startups in the Philippines. Well, guess whose staff that they tried to hire? Mine. Because we're a seed stage company, but they couldn't dislodge our talent. And many of whom were offering double, sometimes triple the salaries that we were offering. One of the things that you can take advantage of when you're building, like you said, it might present itself as a problem, but we quickly turned it into an opportunity. The problem was, well, we don't have talent. The opportunity is we train people with the best skills possible, and the result is we're able to attract and retain the best talent possible. Right? So I think that when you have this problem-solution mindset, when you look at the circumstances that you're in as an opportunity and not as a limitation, you can unlock any other door.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the right way to think about things. And I mean, the other thing that I've seen, like you're very, very deliberate, not investing only in your talent, but in the whole ecosystem. Yeah. So I mean, you're like doing anything from like hosting like podcasts, engineering camps, anything that is like under this earth to bring up the whole ecosystem. So I'd love to hear a little bit more on like kind of your thinking on like a broader ecosystem level.
So it's a bit meta for us because Swarm's a community platform. We want to connect people with each other such that they can do great work together, right? Independent freelancers. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to start to engage the local founder ecosystem and to start to share their stories. It's exactly what you're doing here right now. Because one of the things that gives confidence to a founder that's about to start who hasn't done it before, is that they see someone with a similar story that is trying. They might not have even succeeded yet, but that there is the possibility of getting started and that people will rally around you. So we're still at a very early stage of our ecosystem. So we're very deliberate about rallying around those who want to take the risk, who want to step forward such that they can gain their confidence with their community, right? They might not all make it. Most of them won't. But the problem, the thing that we're trying to create is to encourage folks to keep on trying, to look for that next problem, and to rally around them such that we can amortize the risk across the community. And net, we've attracted tier 1 VC. We've attracted, famously, some of the top tier CTOs, chief product officers, are now moving to the Philippines to help grow the companies that are there, particularly because the ecosystem is starting to get off the ground, right? So being able to invest, like many of the founders that have gone into YC, I've helped them with their applications, helped them advise their business models, advise how they should structure their first management teams. It's because even though the companies that tried to steal my talent, I'm actually helping them figure out how to build their internal training programs, right? Because this is the groundwork that it doesn't take that much more effort, but it multiplies the impact if you're doing it together.
Yeah, I mean, Dexter, just to share this for context, he's so kind with his time. Well, you last time said what was it, more than 10 YC applicants would say hey, here's my application, Dexter, can I pitch to you and can you help me to sharpen it? And you spent hours and hours really helping to those people. Yeah. But I think the beautiful thing that I found of this story, so you said while you just gave your time freely and expect nothing in return, then many people said wow, Dexter is such an amazing guy that I just want to use the product that you built, yeah. Right? So I think this kind of stuff always not always in direct ways like that, but there's always some sort of return for yourself, for the ecosystem, for the things that you care about.
And I think that's exactly right. Once you establish and build these relationships, they'll return back to you. Many of the founders that I help co-found their companies, with their initial business models, helping them fundraise, they're now actually, now that they've raised in the Valley, now that they've raised in Europe, they're actually now facilitating introductions back to me. They're advising me on what the current trends are and what kind of investment theses are gaining traction. So and I think this is what ecosystem means, is yes, you might pay it forward, so to speak. You might help someone out, but it's that intent, it's that investment of care that very quickly circulates. Very quickly, it empowers folks to want to help someone else and come back and empower you. I got all of my early customers without having to do any business development. They were all referrals because you're absolutely right. Those who found value and help in the people that are a part of my company because they were helped with advice or other, they know that there's a value alignment. They know that we care. So we'll take care of them with their problem.
Yeah, so I want to switch gears a little bit to comparing when you build Calibre versus you build Swarm, right? You described that the Philippines ecosystem has gone from basically being non-existent to being a thriving, still early, but super promising ecosystem. So what's the difference between then and now, building your first company Calibre versus building Swarm now? And not only the ecosystem has evolved, obviously your credibility has also evolved, so it's a bit hard maybe to keep separate, but I'd love to hear your opinion, what you've learned, what has changed since the early days.
I think that being a second-time founder, knowing which acceptable risks to take, and not to be afraid to take them, is the biggest difference, right? We felt that, I was very risk averse with my first company, right? We felt like we had to perfect everything before we push the product out and get it into the hands of the users. No. As an early stage founder, your job is to get your product out and to learn, right? As an early stage founder, your objective is to learn fast and get evidence so you can mobilize more resources and support for the thing that your company is trying to do. So one of the things that it was much faster to put up a second company because I was willing to take risks that I wasn't willing to take before. I just knew how to structure a fundraise, knew how to structure a pitch, get my financial model together. But something what was super different having done this around was that I had a lot more advocates who were willing to connect me with those that I didn't, outside of the Philippines, outside of, you've facilitated introductions in Southeast Asia and Europe. And I think that is the value of having folks in your ecosystem. So once you've made it, and you don't need to be big in order to help. You just need to get started. Once you get your own thing off the ground, once you become a founder yourself or get your project off the ground, being a sounding board is a contribution to your community. Being able to compare notes of how to build, what your tech stack is, to compare notes on your design reviews, that is something that is actually very valuable to others who are around you. Because one of the biggest challenges when we were building Calibre is we had no one else to ask. What does our onboarding process need to look like for our SaaS platform? How do you structure a customer success team? You don't need to be an expert to compare notes. And I think that because we have more folks in our ecosystem, more folks to ask, we were able to make a decision about what our payment system is going to be like in a day because we had folks to ask. And I think that knowledge sharing and that openness to spend a little bit of time with others to answer questions was a critical part of what was the difference between now and then. Before, I didn't even know what a cap table was. I didn't know how to calculate dilution. And, since then, safe notes have come out as a thing. We have people to ask now. We have people to compare notes. We can benchmark each other's, valuations and traction and progress. These are the critical things that you have that help you build so much faster when you have people to help you.
So Romania is still obviously also very much emerging ecosystem, also on a fantastic track to grow, and with the first few unicorns being built locally. So what would be your advice to a young either founder or somebody who is considering founding in the audience to look into? What is the things that they should consider differently from, let's say, when they do it in Silicon Valley or somewhere else? What should people in young ecosystems like this do when they start a company?
I would say go out and get honest feedback and be transparent about what you're afraid of. The biggest part about being a founder is in startup land, no one is qualified for the job that they have. And the reason why is because you will be forced to do things you've never done before. So one of the fastest way to learn is to be transparent about what you're afraid about, to ask for help, right? If you're concerned about your growth model, about the stickiness of your product, directly ask for feedback on, what your acquisition funnel looks like. Directly ask for feedback and share what you might be a little embarrassed to share, about what your cost per lead is or what your conversion rate is. If you're not targeted and if you're not willing to be a little bit vulnerable, it's going to take you a lot of time to figure it out on your own. A large part so I'll be practical. I know vulnerability is a very big thing in authenticity. It's very important to be this, but these are not just emotional factors. If you want to look at it from a strictly pragmatic point of view, fear equals time wasted. Be vulnerable to get help with the things that you're afraid of, such that you can move faster. Learn from other people's mistakes. And I'm now, 40 years old? And the youngest person on my team is 18. And I ask for feedback. Erin's laughing. She corrects my freaking grammar and my narrative construction on our marketing materials. You worked with her on the thing that we, on the panel we did together. I'm hungry, I am not ashamed to ask for help. I'm not, I used to be offended. I used to work in government, which is very hierarchical in how decisions get made, and particularly in terms of how prestige and authority work. As a startup founder, I think approaching every new problem with humility and getting feedback from the most junior person that has something important to say is what's going to allow you to adapt faster, learn faster, and move faster.
All right. Okay, I think we're coming slowly to the end of this. I just want to encourage all of you really to use the opportunity to have Dexter here to connect with him. He's going to go up on the QA stage and also answer any follow-up questions that you have. I definitely encourage all of you to check out what he's building with Swarm as well, to give a small plug for that as well. It's a really cool platform for technology freelancers and teams to connect to interesting opportunities. But first and foremost, I really want to say a big thank you. I know, again, Cruz is at the other end of the world, so thank you for sharing your inspiration from the Philippines, how you've built an ecosystem, and how we here can certainly learn a lot from that. Thank you very much, Dexter.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you.